Thank you so much, Joan. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Augusta 2021.
Yay.
You were just listening to the wonderful, our Blues Week co-coordinator, Joan Fenton, Blues Week founder and co-coordinator. And my name is Emily Miller. I am your Zoom host. This is my fearless assistant, Angus, who has discovered hair and really wants to pull mine. We are so delighted to be here with you as part of Augusta 2021. You have arrived at Women and the Blues with Joan Fenton and Eleanor Ellis, and we are having some technical difficulties, but I believe Eleanor is here now. Eleanor, can you say hello? Make sure that we've got you here. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Can you turn on your video, Eleanor?
Yeah, if I knew how to do it, I would do it. Hold on.
It's a button on your bottom left.
Left, start video. Okay.
Yay!
Well, don't say yay yet. All right.
Oh,
Great.
we made it. Eleanor, Ellis.
Hi, Eleanor.
We've done it. So before we get going with this wonderful presentation from Joan Fenton and Eleanor Ellis, I would like to thank our sponsors, the National Endowment for the Arts, the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History, Davis Elkins College, and especially for this presentation, Angus, we're talking about our sponsors. This is very important. Very important. The West Virginia Humanities Council, who is sponsoring this series of events. And I'm going to tell you some more at a later time when this child is not crying. But just know that you are all currently muted, but you can participate in the chat. So if you open up your chat button at the bottom of your screen, if you're on Zoom, and if you're on YouTube, we will transfer those comments over. And Seth Young is watching the YouTube stream, and will pass your comments along to me, and we can convey them to any questions to Eleanor and Joan. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Eleanor and Joan for this wonderful presentation.
I think I'm going to start, and then Eleanor can either interrupt or talk after me. It's probably more of a dialogue than a single person talking and then another. One of the reasons I really wanted to do this is that the history of women in music is very much neglected, particularly in traditional music. And if you look at the recorded history, which I have a list which Emily's going to post at some point here that you can keep and save the chat afterwards, I just listed a lot of women who have done recordings, particularly in the 20s and 30s, and just some names so that as they're being thrown out, you would have that information. But the influence of recorded music is a snapshot in time, that women who were available to go to record are only a piece of the women who were playing music during that time in the 20s and 30s when blues was being recorded. And it's also a snapshot of only a certain period of time. So if you look at traditional Black music, it's very much a vocal music. In the U.S., you have, in slave times, you don't have a lot of access to instruments unless they're made by hand, whereas everybody could sing. And even in your African tradition, you have people always singing. So I think of the music as being a vocal, family, all-inclusive type of music. And out of slave times, out of the banjo, out of the whole history of music, eventually evolves blues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about other styles a little bit, and just I want you to think about the fact that when a family plays music, traditionally particularly, and even now, nobody says, oh, girls don't play that, women don't play that. As we've learned, both Eleanor and I, from traditional musicians, so many of them have talked about, oh, my mom played, oh, my sister played, oh, I learned from my mom. And it may not have always been blues, but it was a musical influence in the family. So that in a lot of times, women were part of a family that was all inclusive playing music. It wasn't just the guys who played blues as blues evolved, but it was also women. But if you think of it in a context of what life is like, after you get married and you have 6 kids, and who's staying home watching the kids? So the mom may play music, may be an influence on the entire family, but may not be the one that's going out to perform and is not the one who's going out to record. Also, during this period as the blues is evolving, if you think about it, where do you go to perform if you're going to go out? You play out on the street, you play at a juke joint, you play someplace that's not comfortable necessarily for a woman to go play. And if she's got family, she stays home, but that doesn't mean she's not playing music, and it doesn't mean she's not playing blues. And when I have talked to so many musicians, and if you read stories about music, people talk about, oh, my mama played, oh, my mama taught me, oh, this and that. So that just nobody's taken the time to document who those women were, what that influence was, and it's anecdotal stories more often than being something that's been documented. And if I go back to when I say the tradition of music was much more vocal than instrumental, we did a class with Cece Conway the other day where we listened to Dink Roberts, which was a movie, playing black banjo. He's a black banjo player, rather, not playing black banjo, but a banjo player who was recorded when he was in the 1970s, and he was born around the turn of the century. And one of the things that Cece pointed out was that all the banjo players, which were really pre-blues, always sang when they played their banjos. So when I think about that, I think so many of the women in blues were vocalists, and that was really a strong part of the music. And when the blues is being documented by what I would say is men with a certain idea of what blues is, if you watch the documentaries about blues, it's like there's one little episode about the women in blues. There's one little piece about, if you watch Ken Burns' series, they barely mention women when they're talking about jazz even. But women were just as influential, I believe, and often because it's safer, they end up being in the church playing music, they end up being in the church singing. And if you think about it, those musics are so similar that influence and that development of musical style is just as much coming from the church as from people who are out there playing blues. Eleanor, you want to add a little something, or
I'll give it a try.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we have to think about the era that a person is in. A person's it's personal as a person, but it's also the era they're in or the time frame they're in. And a lot of the first blues were by the women who were say born in the 1890s, and they recorded and got big in the 1920s and on into the 30s, and that's like Clara Smith or Mamie Smith or Bessie Smith or all the Smiths and other people as well. And so if you think about what was life like then, what was communication like? This is something that we can discuss at a later point, but communication, transportation, how far afield did somebody get from where they were born? Some people, 20 miles was a long way. how did they get there? At any rate, we have, and big thing, what was the influence of the record companies on the music? Basically, I interviewed a guy named Henry Thomas, and he said that before recording came and before they categorized music, it was much more free flowing, and one type of music might have led into another. So in order to target audiences, which they're still doing, if you've ever had your mind read by Facebook or something, they would just say, all right, this is hillbilly music. This is pop music. I don't know all their categories, but I do know that after the recording of Crazy Blues, which was the first so-called blues rock recording, they made up a category called race music, and basically they began to put out blues, and all the classic blues singers were singing away, and someone like Bessie Smith had 40 people at one point in her entourage, and she had a railroad car that went 75 feet long, and there were women whose entrepreneurial side came out, and but the record companies were looking for women with, basically it's like jazz bands behind them, but the word blues was in there, Crazy Blues. So later on it became more of a kind of a folk music, like men with guitars. And I say men with guitars because that's about what it was, men with guitars. And we can discuss why. Joan has said some reasons why it was men with guitars, but there were women who played, and there was maybe one woman who really got into that, and that was Memphis Minnie. She was born in the 1890s too, and she recorded at the same time as some of the classic singers, or maybe a little bit later. But her music was very personal, the songs that she made up and composed. At any rate, I'll stop there and turn it back over to Joan.
So just historically, the first blues recordings were women doing the classical singing, and then and that's what they thought would sell. And there were also men writing songs for them. So what you see is there's a difference in the lyrics. Of some of them were composed songs. Somebody like Bessie Smith also wrote some songs that were very personal. So when she sings Backwater Blues, it's very different from the very risque and suggestive songs that were being written for her to perform. And then they record finally a man playing guitar, and that becomes really popular. And all of a sudden, the recording companies were coming to the South, setting up a studio usually in a furniture store where they sold Victrolas, and would advertise that they were recording, and people would come in and get recorded. And they were looking all of a sudden for guitar and the more country sounds. The records were then being sold all through the country. So starting with recordings, you have the music is being influenced not just locally and regionally by the people that you hear, but all of a sudden records are available everywhere, so that somebody in North Carolina may be playing a Blind Lemon Jefferson tune even though he's from Texas, and vice versa. So Blind Boy Fuller, who's from North Carolina, becomes well known. Memphis Minnie, who, as Eleanor mentioned, who was the most prolific woman guitar player to record during this period, becomes well known. I did a period of doing field research and recordings in North Carolina and West Virginia. And it was interesting to me because at that time, all I played was blues. And I was recording blues and traditional old-time bluegrass music, whatever. And every time I would play blues, every musician I met would remember a blues tune, whether it was male or female, whether it was white or black. Usually the black musicians were already playing blues, but I recorded two women about 16 miles from Augusta in Elkins. They were from Helvetia, and they played a version of Hesitation Blues, which is one of the dirtier blues out there. And they just giggled through it. This is two 70-year-old women, again from this, born at the turn of the century, white women playing banjo, singing Hesitation Blues. So the music goes across, it's not limited to one. I guess what I'm really trying to say is if you liked the music, you learned it, and it didn't matter who played it. But a lot of the musicians that I would meet would have discussed the fact that prior to blues, there was a piano in the household. Parlor music was very popular at the turn of the 19th into early 20th century. The mom often played piano, might play organ in the church, would also play guitar. There were guitars that were called women's guitars. The little small parlor guitars were also often considered a women's instrument, but it was an essential piece of the culture was for women to be playing music. And when I first started wanting to learn blues, all of it had pretty much disappeared. There was nothing available commercially. This is in the early 70s. You could find maybe Columbia reissue of Bessie Smith. You could find two anthologies, three anthologies maybe, one of which was like probably an RCA, which was probably the dirtiest songs you've ever heard in your life. Origins of Jazz Library had a reissue of the Country Blues, which was probably the only country women blues that was available. It was called the Country Women. And the rest of it was really neglected. When Yazoo Records started releasing or reissuing a lot of early blues, there would maybe be one woman playing blues on those records. And part of it is because there wasn't a lot of recording, but also there wasn't a lot of interest. Eleanor, some thoughts from you?
Okay, yeah. Basically, Joan mentioned that one of the reasons, well, we can kind of discuss this, but one of the reasons maybe that there weren't so many women recorded is the fact that when the record scouts went out, somebody would hear about it and tell his pals, and they'd all come in and record, but maybe the women were doing other things at home. And also it could be rough playing some of the places you'd have to play. And I feel as though the sort of different paths that women have gone, for example, the classic blues women who faced amazing odds, which we might want to discuss at some point. And then the few women who got to record with guitars or piano themselves. And then there's the women who were playing and they didn't get recorded till later. Someone like Elizabeth Cotton or Etta Baker, or there are many, Precious Bryant, there are many examples of a woman like that. And there's now. And I think there's a great difference between back, let's just say the 30s and now. I think there's much more opportunity for women. But I just wanted to throw out Alberta Hunt. No, not throw out. I want to say something about Alberta Hunter. She was amazing. Doing the research for some of this, it's just amazing. She left home. Her mother worked in a brothel. As a maid. Alberta Hunter left home at age 11 to become a singer. She went to Chicago because she heard they paid $10 a week. She's 11 years old. And most of these early women, and probably most of them up through whenever, did things as children. Bessie Smith danced on the street while her brother played guitar. And Alberta Hunter was going to go up and be a singer. And she began to play in men's clubs and she could improvise well. She ended up, oh, it said where I was reading, she peeled potatoes by day and hounded club owners for singing jobs by night. So she finally got some jobs, and then she ended up in 1917, and she was born in 1895, so she wasn't very old when this happened. She was touring Paris and London. These women, and think about what someone like Bessie Smith had to do with the entourage of 40 people plus performing. I just wanted to say these women were extraordinary, and basically, even as it goes on, and you find out about other women and what they did and what they went through. Well, I guess my point being, the individual stories are really amazing, and we won't be able to go over them all, or even nearly all of them, right tonight. But it's something you definitely should think about looking at.
In on that a minute, because one of the things I forgot to mention, that was the other place to play music, was brothels. It was probably the most lucrative, probably more than juke joints. And so for Alberta Hunter to actually be in that environment to hear the music was unusual for a woman. So she had that access growing up. Whereas for a woman who's learning at home, to want to walk into that environment to perform, it's very it's not inviting for most women, so that again, that lack of place to perform, to be heard, to learn, and to then have an influence on the known music of the time, whereas the musical influence that you have is often more personal in the home. I'll let you continue, Eleanor. I just want to.
I was about through with that little rant, but basically, I think it's interesting because I can think of my own way of performance and so on, and contrast it with these earlier women who basically, by the time they were 18, I mean, they'd been out there on the street. Like I say, Bessie Smith was on the street dancing and performing. Alberta Hunter was 11 when she ran away from home and her mother, by the way, joined her soon after. So it's kind of backwards from what it usually is. But I think that all these people, the way they get into performing, it's almost just like breathing. Whereas I don't know about other people, but as far as I'm concerned, the first time I went out to perform, I sort of got together some songs that I thought were good, or pretty good. And I went to a coffee house late on Sunday night when nobody was there. And I did the songs, and people liked them. A few people that were there liked them. And that kind of gave me the nerve to go to the next step. But these women had long since done that kind of thing in their performing.
Yeah, from my perspective, the sexual harassment stopped me from performing. It really, there were many incidents, and it just made me never want to perform. So It was a very different thing for me in the 70s. There weren't many women performing at that time in traditional blues, and it just was very uncomfortable for me.
I didn't really start out doing just blues, though. Maybe that was a difference, because I just did anything. And I think that the reason I did veered toward blues are the people that I met when I was up in the Washington, D.C. area, because there were, there's John Jackson and, Archie Edwards.
Some of it is who you meet. I'm just going to get a charger. I'm not leaving.
Okay. Please don't. Okay. Yeah. So,
and I'd like to say, though, if anybody that's watching this has comments they want to do we have a way to raise your hand or to pipe in or whatever? Because we've been at this for a half hour too. So at some point, questions and comments and thoughts are welcome. But go ahead, Eleanor.
No, actually, that was exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say, are there any questions or comments or thoughts so far about this? Who plays? I do kind of know some of this, but
I know some of those names.
anyway. Pearl does.
And I just wanted to say there are folks watching right now on the YouTube as well.
Oh,
So you can't see those people. I just wanted to let you know, Eleanor. But I don't have any questions popping up on that feed right now. But yes.
So I'll add some more. So I think you have to look at there was a huge influence from the women singing early blues, particularly on it influenced it. It really, let's start even before the influence. There you have minstrelsy, you have women performing in vaudeville, you have tent shows, you have traveling shows, and all of this is a way that music is disseminated. Um, and the women that recorded early, a lot of them were taking part in some of these venues. You then add the Broadway shows in the 20s that featured all black casts, had people like Ethel Waters and some fabulous musicians. And so there is a huge impact from the women that are singing. They seem to get out and have gotten their names out more, had their music heard more. Again, when I'm talking about when I was in West Virginia playing, I produced a record of an old time fiddler, Oscar Wright and his son. Oscar was 80. This is in the 70s. So again, he's born around 1890. They played a Bessie Smith tune for me on the album, and they played a Ida Cox tune because they had listened to blues. So they heard those early women playing, and it stayed with them, and it was music that they liked. The ones that are playing the instruments and the guitar, the guitars, whether they're playing guitar, banjo, piano, whatever instruments they're playing, that influence is very different because so few of them got out and performed up until the 70s, when all of a sudden a lot of the musicians such as Victoria Spivey, Alberta Hunter, are, quote, rediscovered, have an influence, and then people are starting to look at what the other, what was done on guitar by women, and what was that repertoire that was available. And you start to have other women coming in and playing blues, learning blues, and you have, as Eleanor said, starting in the 70s on, you have a different era of women in blues. When we first started Blues Week, which is in '83, I think we had 2 women taking the classes, 3. We had to like form women bands, have like women support groups, and it took several years till the end of the 80s, early 90s, to where all of a sudden we had a lot of women coming wanting to learn the genre, knowing about the music and wanting to play the music. So it really, I feel like Blues Week had a huge influence in women realizing blues was a genre they wanted to take part in. Eleanor, looks like you got some notes there.
I had one question.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you have a sense of especially I'm thinking mostly of the body songs I saw on your list, like Shave and Dry, which is like maybe the bodiest song I've ever heard in my entire
I tried to list a body and then a not body for
Yeah.
each person on that list so that you could see
The-
what I was trying to do is show you this was like the body song, but they also did this one, and to not simply show you the bodies or the other ones.
Right. I was curious in that repertoire, and maybe just in general, do you have a sense were the women blues singers also writing those songs, or were there other writers churning
You
that
have
stuff
a
out?
lot of what's it, Bradshaw? What's his first name? You had a lot of people writing those songs for them, but you also had some writing their own. So that when you look at the Bessie Smith repertoire, as I say, a couple of them are her own. They're much more personal. But let me backtrack a little bit. You have topics such as a man's sexual prowess, what you're going to do to your man. You have topics about prostitution. Tricks Ain't Walking is an incredible song about prostitution. Who else has ever written a song that was popular that sold about being a prostitute? You have a lot of songs about being abused and beaten. You have so I feel like the bawdier songs, from my sense of it, were less often written by the women, but some of them also got into that into I don't know how many of them wrote those songs. I always felt like it was more written for them. Eleanor, your sense on that?
So they're part of the folk process. There are songs, there are expressions, and there are things that are. I feel as though when they went from the big shows and the classic blues singers to the more individualized recordings, which a lot of times were men and instruments, but I feel as though it became more either very personal or part of the folk process. For example, the phrase, "You can read my letter, but you sure can't read my mind," that appears all over the place because it's great, it's a good phrase. And but I was thinking about say Memphis Minnie, that song "Nothing in Ramblin'." I mean, that is a deep song, and that is very personal. It's like, I'm going to quote it, but I'm not going to play it, but I'm going to quote it just quickly, some of the verses. "I was born in Louisiana, raised in Algiers. Wherever I'm going, the people always hear, ain't nothing in rambling, or neither roaming round. I believe I'll get married and settle down. I first left home, I went to Tennessee. People all hollering, come and stay with me, ain't nothing in rambling. And I was walking through the alley with my hand in my coat. Police tried to shoot me, thought it's something I stole, ain't nothing in rambling. People on the highway are drifting and crying, some of them starving, some of them dying, ain't nothing in rambling." I mean, that's a heavy, heavy personal song, which has also got a kind of a universal appeal. And so I think that a lot of the songs at that point was like a combination of sort of the folk process, like you hear a line that you can't get out of your mind, you put it in a song, but you also have perhaps personal things. And Memphis Minnie had her subjects were amazing. She had a subject about a cop in Helena called Reaching Pete. She had something called Sylvester and His Mule. Sylvester was a African-American farmer. He wasn't a sharecropper, he was a farmer, and he was going to lose his farm, and he kept calling President Roosevelt and finally got him, and Roosevelt saved his farm. And so she wrote a song about that. And she's written a song about a hoodoo lady. She says, "Don't put that thing on me, I'm going back to Tennessee." So, and there were, I don't know if you have this on your list, Joan, but in the New York Times, that article about Geechee Wiley and LV.
Put that reference in there.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. And I think I just very briefly want to read you one little excerpt from it. It's about LV Thomas. She says, "Our interview at the church had given us a silhouette. Her family filled it in with bold, bright strokes. They said that she rolled her own tobacco, kite brand, in a green pouch. She also sometimes smoked a corncob pipe. She carried a pistol under her apron, a long-handled old type of pistol. Robin stood up and did an impression of her locking up the house at night, staggering stiffly around in her nightgown with the long pistol dangling out of her hand. She would sing while doing the dishes and cleaning. Her house had no running water. She didn't trust banks and kept her money." Now, this is a good place to keep money if you don't want people to steal it. "In the outhouse under the planks. She liked to hunt possums and chopped her own wood. Had heard that she used to jump train. She was turning back into a folk figure, but it was all apparently true. So this is just an example of some of the, some of the characters that make up these women. They're most of them of the earlier women are very independent and very, just strong-willed and uh, very interesting when you can find out personal things about them.
And what I would add is, I sent the reference to this article. This article in the New York Times was phenomenal because nobody knew anything about L.V. Thomas. Nobody knew anything about Geeshie Wiley. It was just like, and somebody did this incredible research about it. And I wrote the wrong thing here as I'm trying to talk. It's Maddie Delaney. But I think there's a difference between, going back to the question from Emily, there's a difference between the repertoire of the classic blues singers and the women that were playing guitar and instrumental, and the instrumentalists who were more guitar players wrote many more of their own songs. Or interpreted the song. So when Maddie Delaney does Big Road Blues, she calls it Dark Road Blues. It's a different version. She's turned it into her own, even though it's known as a Tommy Johnson tune. I really like her version of it. But when you take some of these very risque songs from the 20s and 30s, a lot of them were written in, they were told who was going to play on the recording with them. The backup band was not somebody they selected to sing with. They came in the studio. This is who they had. So it's a very different concept of writing your own songs and how personal they are. And I think sometimes you can hear how personal they are when somebody's doing it. And I urge you to listen to Alberta Hunter, who recorded when she was in her 80s a lot of these songs. And when she delivers some of these risque songs, you believe her. I mean, she talks through it, and it's just very funny. And she had a great sense of humor. Was a fabulous performer. There was a club in New York where she was performing every week, and she was just amazing.
She's one of the few people who lied about her age to make herself younger, so she could, when she decided to retire from music, so she could go to nursing school. And then I think she was like 70, but they thought she was really 85, but they thought she was 70. Then they said she had to retire. She was too old. Little did they know. And that was when she went back and had her second singing career. And you should definitely listen to her on YouTube because she's something else. She didn't lose a bit.
At the same time, which was not a woman, U.B. Blake was performing, also of that older generation, and the two of them were probably the most had the most successful second careers of musicians from the early 19th century. Sippy Wallace as well because of Bonnie Raitt, but the other two I think were more performers and really got out there. Were all over the place.
Absolutely. Does anybody have any comments or questions? I know there are a couple of women at least out there listening that play music themselves, and I don't.
A question came in from Linda. Did Geeshie Wiley play guitar by herself, or were there two people? I'm not sure what the question exactly.
She and L.V. Thomas, I think, did the recordings together. What do you say, Jen?
Yeah, I think it's been a long time since I read that article. I thought there was somebody else that played with her on the Pick Poor Robin Clean. I think there's somebody else on there. If you read the New York Times article, you'll know everything you need to know. But and I put the link in there, I believe. Did I put that in there? I always think
also you did. You
okay.
Sent it to me, and then I sent it on.
Oh, I sent it to you by mistake. Okay, yeah. But
there's a question from Nancy. Where are good references to learn about these women? And that New York Times article.
What I'm saying is there is not much. There is a book about Bessie Smith. There is the New York Times article. I feel like this is the neglected piece. If you watch any documentary about blues, it's like a second thought. It's like it really is just thrown in there. Um, I was watching the Ken Burns jazz series, where and a lot of these women that we consider blues music were influences into jazz, and he mentions them, and it's like so like, oh yeah, there was Lena Horne, there was this, there was that, there was that, 2 minutes of this, 2 minutes of that, and that's it. So I think you really have to dig into every book to see if something is said, but there's really not a whole lot, which is why I wanted to give you all the names, um, or at least of a lot of these women, to get you sort of started on that. But I feel like the info I have, I picked up here and there. And when I was trying to prepare for this, I started looking for articles and for things, and it was like, it's really one of those where you just have to go through every little piece of something to get the stories. There's usually something about Mamie Smith. There's usually something about Claire Smith and Bessie Smith. Lil Johnson is sort of, I mean, she's so ignored. Um, and she was, she should not be. Um, so I think it's just sort of every blues book mentions a little bit, but nothing much.
That's because one of the reasons is because we don't know much sometimes. Like I think it was Maddie Delaney, and I'm wrong on this, but she only recorded 178, right? With
She did M&O Blues and Big Road Blues. I don't remember if there was anything else. M&O Blues is a great tune.
I didn't know she recorded that one.
Yeah, she does. I Hate That Train. They all call the M&O.
Oh, that one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that's a great song.
Yeah.
I think so. And nobody knows anything more about it. They're just rumors. So one of the reasons we don't know anything is because we don't know anything.
But with some of the musicians, people went and did the research when there was the chance to do it, and people didn't do it on a lot of these women.
Yeah.
In the 60s, nobody knew anything about Robert Johnson. In the 70s, there wasn't much known. People who were driven and motivated went and figured it out, which is the same, with the Geeshie Wiley and L.V. Thomas article. It was just by circumstance that got actually published.
Well, because somebody kind of took the information from Mac McCormick, and quite frankly, I think it was fine that they did. I'm glad they did.
I'm glad they did too. But there isn't much, and sometimes John Hammond was releasing the Bessie Smith tunes and things like that in the 60s, early 70s. So liner notes on some of the albums provide some information, which again, we no longer have those. Nobody shows those liner notes. Nick Pearls was doing the Yazoo records. Everything had a little bit of a blurb, not much, but whatever was known was put on those liner notes. And I don't even know where you go to. I mean, I'm sure it must be archived somewhere, the liner notes from all those records.
Well, yeah, that was one of the things that people disliked about getting little CDs.
Oh, yeah, really.
The LPs had pictures, they had great liner notes and all of that stuff. And some CDs you can find with liner notes, but it's not the same. It's so small.
And the other is the Library of Congress recordings, which, that is available. But it's more a research project than a readily available. One of the interesting things was, going back to showing the film about Dink Roberts, who was the banjo player. We talked about during that talk, there was a woman by the name of Dina Epstein who wrote a book about the banjo, and she was a librarian who spent 25 years researching Black music, and she went through every possible reference that she could find, and in the early 70s printed a book that documented that the banjo has its roots in Africa and is an African American instrument. And what she found was, in doing her research, nobody had bothered to do it. Nobody had been interested. And it took a librarian, going through every reference, everything to find, she said there's a film called The Librarian and the Banjo, which goes through how she did this research, which was a fluke. And she says, she read one entire manuscript, and then on the last page it said something that was important. So this is really, a project that somebody needs to do to write the history of all these women together and put it together into showing how important it was. And it's again, if you read a biography of some blues musician, all of a sudden on one page he says, yeah, my mama played, she taught me how to play guitar. My mama was the one that started me. My sisters and I had a band. We used to play together. Etta Baker says, her brothers played, and then suddenly she and her sisters decided to learn together. But you wouldn't know that she had two sisters that played if you didn't read or listen to the interview that she did. So each of these little pieces takes a project, it takes a lot of time to find it all.
Yeah. I think that it's interesting to think about now as compared to then. And there are many, many really wonderful women musicians doing blues and doing other things as well. And what is the difference? What's the difference between the 1970s, for that matter, and now? And society has changed, and we've changed our attitudes, and there's more opportunity, and all of a sudden you can find some really amazing musicians who are women. So I think that's worth also thinking about, how society itself can be restrictive or it can be encouraging. And I think probably because of the women's movement and just, I don't know, something, there are a lot more women now who are playing the music. But of course, we're not in the same society we were in 1910. It's changed quite a bit.
And also, it's not just in blues, it's in all forms of music where women are stepping out, and particularly in the non-traditional roles, rock and roll particularly, or whatever it is. You're not, when we grew up, you never saw a woman playing electric guitar. You never saw a woman playing the drums. You never saw in performance, which doesn't mean that they weren't doing it at home, but they weren't out there performing it.
Yeah. So do we have?
Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say we're about an hour into this, so
yeah, we'll wrap it up pretty soon here. But I was wondering, this is sort of specific, Joan, but I was wondering if you would say a few words about Flora Moulton. I picked up the CD that you had produced, or I think you produced it, of hers. No.
That was no, wait, who was talking? I don't even know.
That's Emily.
Hey, Emily. Sorry.
Or you talk about Flora.
Well, I used to play. I played with Flora.
You played with Flora. That's who I was. Sorry.
Yeah.
I got myself confused. I am juggling a 4-month-old here.
Yeah, we understand. Flora was an example of the kind of woman who did go out and do it. Now she was born with cataracts, I think. So she had very poor eyesight, and she wasn't supposed to go to school but she did. And she moved to Washington to be near her brother, who was a pastor here, when she was fairly young. And she tried everything she could. She's another example of one of those women who just pushes forward till they succeed. She tried everything she could she took training for this and so on and so on. Nothing worked. One thing worked: singing on the street. So she took her guitar out, and when she started, the police would say, look, you can't be here, you're begging. And they'd make her go home. She said, I go home, I'd cry and pray, I'd go back out the next day. And it's ended up so that she was very known and loved by many generations of people. But when I met her, her guitar partner, Ed Morris, had died a couple of years before, and I gave her and Larry Wise a ride to a festival. And when we were going back home, she asked if I wanted to play guitar with her. And I said, well, I'll try. And we ended up having a really amazing relationship until she died in the, I think 18, and I'm really backwards. 1989, I think. No, anyway. And she was an example of one of those women who just, if she wanted something, she didn't let it stop her. She went after it. And she applied for a grant from the DC government and made an album. And then it was an LP. And later on, Tom Minty of Patuxent Records, that I record for, put it out again as a CD, and it is available as a CD. So, but I had a great time playing with Flora. We went all over Europe. That was something else. And I could tell you a lot of stories, but we don't have time. But I'd suggest you look her up and maybe even get the CD, because it has Phil Wiggins on it. It has Larry Wise. I play guitar, and it has her church group on a few songs. And I just think you'd like it. So.
Someone was asking for the spelling of Flora's name.
Yes.
Spelling of Flora's name, Molton, right?
Yeah, that's right. Molton. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I hope this was interesting for everybody and provokes some thought and makes you want to find out a little bit more and just to think about the things that are known, not known, that maybe you can dig up and find out, and also just to realize how important these women were to the evolution of blues and to the music that we all love. And
Yeah.
I'm so glad you.
I was just going to say, do look them up on YouTube and listen. It's a great experience, and also finding out about them personally in their lives. It's really interesting.
Thank you so much. I am so sorry. He was really good through this whole conversation. I got to hear everything perfectly. And then, of course, in the last 2 seconds.
When you want them to, they don't.
Hey, Seth, are you there? He's on here.
I am here, Emily.
If you mind wrapping up?
Yes, of course. Thank you, guys. Thank you so very much for a very illuminating discussion, and probably one that needs to be continued on into our in-person sessions next summer. This, I just, in my free time last night, as I was winding down, was watching a documentary about Betty Davis, the funk singer that was girlfriend to Jimi Hendrix and married to Miles Davis, and molded those two careers and changed funk in a way that, unlike a few other single individuals have. And yet she's so unsung within the genre and what she did to pop music. And so I feel like this is a through line that has been through many different genres that we know and love. Coming up next is Flawn's Singers Circle. This is a monthly engagement, and if you've not been to it before, you should check it out. It's a really good time, and Flawn does a heck of a job, as he does with most things, in directing a virtual harmonization sing-along.
Really?
Yeah, it's truly great. Eleanor, you should head over there. You'd have a great time. While you're on the computer, just head on over. we're going to wrap up now because we're all going to get over to that. We'd like to thank our sponsors, the National Endowment for the Arts, the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History, the West Virginia Humanities Council, Davis Uncles College, most of all you, the participants of the 2021 Summer Online Heritage Series. Thank you so very much. Emily, thank you for being incredibly awesome in the face of a lot of distraction tonight. You're truly a marvel. I'll see all you guys in a couple minutes over in the singer circle.
Night.
Thank you, Eleanor and Joan. It was really nice.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Angus says thank you.
Is this the place for the summer circle, or do we have to go somewhere else?
There's a new link, and I'm going to post it in the chat right now, so I won't end the meeting quite yet, and I'm going to post you the link. Sorry, we got confused. There you go. There's the singer circle link.
Here we go.
As soon as we get off, he'll stop being fussy.
Exactly. No, he really picked like the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes, and in between he just slipped. It was great. Okay. Bye.